My name is Buddy, and I never thought at 34 years old I would open my front door to find the woman who threw me out at 16 standing on my porch. My mother abandoned me for her new family without a second thought. Now, after 17 years of silence, she showed up demanding I pay for my half-sibling's college education because I made it big in tech. The look on her face when I finally stood up for myself was nothing compared to what happened next. If you want to hear how everything changed in an instant, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe, and stay tuned for the whole story. Growing up in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, life was simple but meaningful. My mom, Laura, and I lived in a small two-bedroom apartment that always smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The walls were thin, the furniture was secondhand, but it was home. Every corner held memories of just the two of us against the world. My biological father walked out when I was 3 years old. I barely remember him, just vague flashes of a tall man with a booming laugh who disappeared one Tuesday morning and never came back. Mom never spoke badly about him, just said that some people were not meant to be parents and left it at that. She worked double shifts at the local diner and picked up weekend receptionist work at a dentist office to keep us afloat. I became the little man of the house early on. By 7, I was making my own breakfast and helping with laundry. By 10, I could cook basic meals and knew how to pay the electric bill if Mom was running late with her shift. It was a lot of responsibility for a kid, but I never resented it because we were a team. Our special thing was Sunday mornings. No matter how exhausted she was, Mom would wake up early to make pancakes from scratch. We would sit at our wobbly kitchen table with maple syrup dripping onto our plates, planning our future together. She would help me with science homework, and I would tell her about my dreams of building computers. Mom used to say I got my brains from her side of the family. I was always tinkering with electronics, taking apart old radios and putting them back together. By 13, I was the neighborhood tech support, fixing laptops and installing software for $10 a job. I saved every penny in a coffee can, labeled college fund. I still remember the night everything started to change. Mom came home with a sparkle in her eyes I had never seen before. She had served a businessman named Richard at the diner, and he had left her a $100 tip and his business card. She was glowing, talking about how he wore a suit that probably cost more than our rent and drove a car that purred like a jungle cat. When she announced 2 weeks later that Richard had asked her on a date, I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved someone who would treat her well after years of sacrificing everything for me. She spent 3 hours getting ready, trying on every decent outfit she owned, asking me which earrings looked better. I told her she looked beautiful in anything because it was true. Richard picked her up in his shiny black Mercedes. He was tall with perfect teeth and designer clothes. He shook my hand firmly and called me young man in a way that made me stand up straighter. He brought Mom flowers and complimented our apartment in a way that somehow made it sound like he was complimenting us for making the best of a bad situation. Their first date turned into a second, then a third. Soon he was coming over for dinner. I would cook while Mom fretted about whether the mismatched plates would bother him. Richard always brought expensive wine and talked about his real estate developments and investment portfolio. I noticed he never asked me questions about school or my interests, but Mom seemed so happy I kept those observations to myself. The first real warning sign came during a dinner at his house. He lived in a mansion in the Gold Coast, with marble floors and a view of Lake Michigan. When I mentioned wanting to study computer science in college, he laughed and said there was no future in being an IT guy fixing printers all day. I tried to explain the difference, but he cut me off to tell a story about how he had fired his entire tech department and outsourced it overseas. Mom laughed along nervously, then quickly changed the subject. Later that night, she told me not to mind him, that Richard was just old school and did not understand technology. She asked me to try harder to impress him because he could really change our lives for the better. I promised I would, for her sake. I did not realize then that it would be impossible to impress a man who had already decided I was not worth his time or attention. I did not understand that in his world, People were assets or liabilities, and he had already categorized me as the latter. The whirlwind romance between my mother and Richard progressed faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months of their first date, he proposed with a diamond ring that caught the light from every angle. Mom cried when she showed it to me, whispering that she never thought she would have something so beautiful. The wedding was a lavish affair at one of Chicago's most exclusive hotels. I wore a rented tuxedo and stood awkwardly among Richard's wealthy friends and business associates, who looked at me with curious, slightly pitying eyes. After a 2-week honeymoon in Italy, we moved into Richard's sprawling mansion in Winnetka. My new bedroom was bigger than our entire old apartment, with its own bathroom and a view of the perfectly manicured backyard. Mom kept saying how lucky we were, how this was the fresh start we both deserved. I tried to be grateful, but everything felt wrong from the beginning. Richard enrolled me in North Shore Academy, an elite private school where everyone had been friends since kindergarten. I showed up mid-semester with discount store clothes and a strong South Side accent. The other students were not openly cruel, just indifferent in that practiced way of the very rich. I ate lunch alone and came home to an empty house most days. Mom was busy with charity committees and country club events, learning to be the perfect wife in Richard's social circle. Everything changed again when Mom announced she was pregnant with twins. Richard threw an extravagant gender reveal party where blue and pink confetti rained down on their delighted guests. Mom hugged me tightly and promised the babies would adore their big brother. Richard clapped me on the shoulder and said I would need to set a good example, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Alexander and Amanda were born when I was 15. Tiny, perfect babies with Richard's straight nose and my mother's dimpled chin. Mom disappeared into a haze of midnight feedings and designer baby clothes. The nursery was a showpiece featured in a local magazine, all soft grays and vintage furniture. When I tried to help with the twins, Richard would often appear suddenly to take over, commenting that I was holding them wrong or burping them incorrectly. As the twins grew, the distance between me and my mother expanded. She was constantly exhausted, moving between pediatrician appointments and baby music classes while juggling Richard's social obligations. When I tried to talk to her about school problems or college applications, she would listen with half an ear, distracted by a fussing baby or a text from Richard. Richard never criticized me directly in front of my mother, at least not at first. Instead, he would pull her aside for private conversations, after which she would approach me with concerned expressions about my attitude or behavior. "You seem angry lately," she would say. "Richard thinks you're jealous of the babies." I would deny it, confused and hurt, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The family photos that began appearing on the walls told the story better than words could. Professional portraits of Richard, Mom, and the twins in matching white outfits on the beach. Richard holding the babies proudly in his home office. Mom cradling the twins in the garden. I was noticeably absent from these carefully curated images of family perfection. When I asked Mom about a family portrait with all of us, she seemed flustered, saying we would do it soon when everyone was less busy. Richard overheard and smoothly suggested that we should wait until the twins were a bit older, as though that explained my exclusion. I nodded and retreated to my room, the message received loud and clear. The summer before my junior year, Richard took the family to his beach house in the Hamptons. At the last minute, he announced there was not enough room because his business partners would be joining them. Someone needed to stay behind to watch the house. Mom looked torn for approximately 30 seconds before agreeing that it made sense for me to stay. I was 16, responsible, and would probably be bored with the babies anyway. They left me for 3 weeks with a credit card for food and a list of house rules. I tried talking to Mom about how I felt when they returned, sun-tanned and laden with shopping bags. She seemed genuinely confused by my hurt feelings. Richard had already explained to her that teenagers need independence, and that I had probably enjoyed having the house to myself. Besides, the twins were entering a crucial developmental stage and needed consistent parental presence. My mother nodded along with his expert assessment, handing me a souvenir T-shirt, as though that could make up for being left behind. My academic achievements, once a source of pride for my mother, were now met with distracted congratulations. When I made the honor roll, Richard commented that the public schools must have really low standards if I could excel at North Shore so easily. When I won the regional science competition with a network security program I had coded myself, he suggested I had probably gotten help from somewhere, or that the judges were not very discerning. I watched my mother transform from the woman who had once stayed up late helping me with science projects to someone who forgot to attend my school presentations. Her new identity as Richard's wife and the twins' mother seemed to have completely overwritten her previous life. On the rare occasions when she and I were alone, she would sometimes look at me with a flicker of recognition, as though remembering the person she used to be, before quickly returning to discussions about the twins' latest milestones or Richard's business successes. By the time I turned 16, we were essentially strangers living in the same house. I existed in the margins of their perfect family picture, a reminder of a past my mother seemed increasingly eager to forget. My 16th birthday arrived with minimal fanfare. I woke up expecting at least some acknowledgement of the day, perhaps the pancake breakfast that had once been our tradition. Instead, I found a hurriedly scrawled note from Mom saying she had taken the twins to their swimming lesson. Richard had left for work hours earlier. On the counter sat a gift card to an electronics store with no card, no message. Just a plastic rectangle that screamed afterthought. I spent the day at school, not telling anyone it was my birthday, and came home to find the house in chaos. Richard was standing in the kitchen holding my laptop, his face flushed with anger. Mom was pacing nearby, the twins wailing in their playpen, picking up on the tension in the room. What I had done, apparently, was leave my computer unlocked. What Richard had done was read through my private messages with my only friend from the old neighborhood. Messages where I had vented my frustrations about living with Richard, about feeling replaced and forgotten. Messages where I had called him controlling and manipulative. Messages where I had worried about how he was changing my mother. "You ungrateful little punk," Richard spat, waving my laptop dangerously close to the granite countertop. "After everything I have done for you, I have given you a roof over your head, clothes on your back, food in your mouth. And this is how you repay me? By poisoning your mother against me?" I looked to Mom, expecting her to defend me, to point out the invasion of privacy. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting between Richard and me. "This is very disappointing, buddy," was all she said. The argument escalated quickly. I asked why he was reading my private messages. He claimed as the head of the household he had every right to monitor what happened under his roof. I pointed out that the laptop had been bought with money I earned fixing computers in our old neighborhood. He laughed and asked if I thought I'd still own anything if not for his generosity. The twins continued crying in the background, their wails growing louder as voices raised. Richard suddenly stopped mid-sentence, pivoted, and lifted both children into his arms, hushing them gently. "See what you're doing?" he said in a dangerously soft voice. "You're upsetting them. You've always resented them, haven't you?" I denied it immediately, horrified by the accusation. I loved my half-siblings despite the complications of our family situation. But Richard was building a case, piece by piece. He reminded my mother of instances I had supposedly ignored the twins, of times I had seemed annoyed by their crying, of the sullen attitude he claimed I displayed whenever they were the center of attention. And then came the masterstroke. Richard set the twins down and put his arm around my mother's shoulders. "The twins need stability, Laura. They need peace. Look at them. They can sense the negativity." Hess nearly groaned. "But they are just babies. They need you. They need us. Who's more important here?" It was an impossible, unfair question. Any decent parent would refuse to rank their children by importance. But my mother, worn down by years of Richard's influence and distracted by the crying twins, made a choice I never saw coming. "Maybe it's time Buddy moved out," she said quietly. "Hess, almost an adult. He could get a job, an apartment." I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. I was 16 years old. still legally a child, still in high school, and my mother was suggesting I live on my own because her husband found messages he did not like. It wasn't a suggestion for long. Richard's face lit up with vindication. You're absolutely right, Laura. It's the only solution. He needs to learn responsibility, independence. Within minutes, it had been decided. I had 2 hours to pack whatever I could carry. Richard stood in the doorway of my room, arms crossed, supervising to make sure I did not take anything valuable. Most of my possessions, including my laptop, were purchased with my own money. But I was limited to what would fit in 2 duffel bags. Family photos, childhood mementos, the quilt my grandmother had made before she died all stayed behind. My mother appeared in the doorway as I was finishing, the twins mercifully absent. I expected tears, regret, some indication that this was breaking her heart. Instead, she handed me an envelope containing $300 in cash. This should help you get started, she said, her voice eerily calm. You're smart, buddy. You'll figure it out. The twins need me now more than you do. You're old enough to make it on your own. I tried one last appeal. Mom, please. I'm still in high school. Where am I supposed to go? She looked past me, at some invisible point on the wall. You have friends, don't you? Stay with them until you find an apartment. This is for the best, really. Richard thinks, and I agree, that a clean break is better than dragging it out. When my time was up, Richard escorted me to the front door like a security guard removing a trespasser. I looked back once to see my mother standing at the top of the grand staircase, arms wrapped around herself. Our eyes met briefly before she turned away. The door closed behind me with a decisive click. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. I stood on the porch of the mansion that had never really been my home, 2 bags at my feet, the weight of complete abandonment pressing on my chest until I could hardly breathe. That first night was the worst. A rainstorm rolled in, soaking through my clothes as I huddled under a park pavilion, trying to figure out what to do next. I tried calling my mother repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. By morning, my number had been blocked. The message could not have been clearer. My mother had chosen her new family, and I was no longer welcome in their picture-perfect life. The morning after being thrown out, I wandered through the affluent streets of Winnetka with no destination in mind. I could not go back to our old neighborhood. I had no connections there anymore. The few casual friends I'd made at North Shore Academy lived in massive houses with security systems and parents who would ask questions I could not answer. I had $300, 2 bags of clothing, and no plan. By mid-afternoon, desperation drove me to school. I had missed morning classes, but I thought perhaps I could wash up in the bathroom and figure out my next move. That's where Mr. Jenkins found me, splashing cold water on my face, trying to hide that I'd been crying. Thomas Jenkins taught advanced computer science and had been the one teacher who seemed to see potential in me. He took one look at my disheveled appearance and the bags I'd stashed in the handicap stall and ushered me into his empty classroom. I don't know what made me trust him enough to tell the truth. Maybe it was the simple kindness in his eyes, or the fact that I had absolutely nowhere else to turn. I explained what had happened, stumbling over the words, still unable to believe that my own mother had chosen her new husband and children over me. Mr. Jenkins listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he didn't offer empty platitudes about how everything would be okay. Instead, he picked up his phone and called his wife. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in their modest bungalow while Mrs. Jenkins, a nurse with kind eyes and efficient movements, made up their spare bedroom. It was meant to be temporary. A few days, maybe a week until I could contact extended family or find some other solution. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. My mother's phone number remained blocked. Letters I sent to the house were returned unopened. The one time I gathered the courage to go back, Richard answered the door and threatened to call the police if I did not leave immediately. The Jenkins never made me feel like a burden, but I was acutely aware that they had not signed up to take in a troubled teenager indefinitely. They had 2 children in college and modest salaries. I insisted on contributing, using my computer repair skills to bring in whatever money I could. I converted a corner of their garage into a small repair shop, putting up flyers around the neighborhood offering discount rates for computer troubleshooting. Word spread quickly, and soon I had a steady stream of customers dropping off laptops with viruses or desktops that needed upgrades. School became both a refuge and a challenge. I was determined not to let my personal circumstances affect my education, but concentrating was difficult when I was constantly worried about my future. My grades slipped initially as I adjusted to my new reality, then gradually improved as I established a routine and purpose. The logistics of being a homeless teenager were more complicated than I had ever imagined. I needed a mailing address for school correspondence. I needed somewhere to store my few possessions. I needed access to a shower and laundry facilities. The Jenkins provided all that and more, but I knew I could not depend on their generosity forever. I lived in constant fear that someone would report my situation to social services. At 16, I was still legally a minor, and the thought of being placed in foster care terrified me. Mr. Minor, Jenkins advised me to contact authorities himself, believing they could force my mother to take responsibility, but I refused. If she did not want me, I did not want to be forced upon her. That winter was particularly brutal. Chicago temperatures plummeted below zero, and heating the Jenkins garage workshop became an exercise in futility. I wore fingerless gloves while typing and wrapped myself in layers of sweatshirts. One evening, after spending hours trying to recover data from a frozen hard drive with equally frozen fingers, I broke down completely. The hopelessness of my situation crashed over me like a wave, and for the first time, I considered giving up. Mrs. Jenkins found me like that, huddled on the floor of the garage, sobbing uncontrollably. She didn't say anything, just sat down beside me and pulled me into her arms like I was one of her own children. I can't remember the last time my own mother had hugged me that way, with total acceptance and without expectation. That night was a turning point. I realized I had been given something many people never find: a second family who chose me, even when my biological one did not. The Jenkins weren't just providing shelter, they were showing me what unconditional support looked like. Their belief in me became the foundation I needed to believe in myself. With their encouragement, I expanded my computer business. Mr. Jenkins helped me set up a proper workbench in the garage with adequate heating and lighting. Mrs. Jenkins handled the accounting, insisting I save half of everything I earned for college. Their daughter Emma, home from college for winter break, helped me create a professional website. By spring, I had enough regular clients to work nearly full-time after school and on weekends. I specialized in data recovery and security solutions, areas where I could charge premium rates for specialized knowledge. For the first time, I began to see a future for myself beyond daily survival. Graduation day arrived with mixed emotions. I had maintained a 3.8 gigapascals despite everything, earning acceptance to the state university with a partial scholarship. As I sat among my classmates in my borrowed cap and gown, I scanned the audience, a tiny part of me still hoping to see my mother there. Her seat remained empty. The Jenkins family cheered loudly enough for 10 people when my name was called. Mr. Jenkins clapped until his hands were red, and Mrs. Jenkins took dozens of photos. They hosted a small graduation party for me afterward, complete with a homemade cake and cards from their extended family members who had come to know me over the months. That summer, I threw myself into preparing for college. Without parents to co-sign loans or provide financial information for aid applications, I faced numerous bureaucratic hurdles. Mr. Jenkins helped me complete paperwork declaring myself an independent student, a process that required documenting that I had no contact with or support from my parents. By August, I had secured enough financial aid, scholarships, and student loans to cover tuition and basic expenses. The Jenkins helped me shop for dorm supplies, filling the trunk of their sedan with twin XL sheets, shower caddies, and a refurbished laptop to replace the one Richard had kept. As we loaded the car for the drive to campus, Mrs. Jenkins pressed an envelope into my hand, a copy of their house key and a standing invitation to come home during breaks. Home. It was a word I had nearly forgotten the meaning of, until they showed me that home isn't always where you start, but where you are welcomed back, no matter what. College proved to be both harder and more liberating than I had anticipated. The freedom of being truly on my own was exhilarating, but the financial reality was harsh. My partial scholarship and loans covered tuition and dormitory costs, but little else. The first semester, I subsisted primarily on dining hall meals, carefully rationing my meal plan to ensure I never went hungry. When the dorms closed for winter break, I discovered another challenge of being a student without family support. With nowhere to go, I spent 3 weeks living in my car, parking in different campus lots each night to avoid security. I showered at the 2 4-hour gym where I had scrounged up enough money for the cheapest membership. The temperature dipped below freezing most nights, and I would run the engine periodically to warm up, careful not to waste too much gas. It was during an introductory programming class in my second semester that I met Jackson Reeves. Tall, with perpetually rumpled clothes and an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure coding languages, Jackson approached me after I debugged a particularly complex assignment faster than anyone else in class. "You code like someone who's actually trying to solve real problems, not just pass a class," he observed. "Want to grab coffee?" That coffee turned into an all-night coding session at the 2 4-hour campus cafe. Jackson was working on a security application that would automatically detect and neutralize certain types of malware. He had the theoretical framework, but was struggling with the practical implementation. I had the hands-on experience from years of fixing infected computers, but lacked his deeper understanding of security protocols. By morning, we had hammered out a working prototype and the beginnings of a partnership that would change both our lives. We spent our sophomore year refining the security application, using every spare hour between classes and part-time jobs. Jackson came from money, but insisted on making his own way, working as a teaching assistant and living in a dingy off-campus apartment that became our de facto headquarters. We survived on vending machine snacks and energy drinks, coding until our eyes burned and our fingers cramped. Our breakthrough came when Jackson convinced a professor to introduce us to a former student who ran a tech incubator in Chicago. The meeting was meant to be 15 minutes of advice. We walked out 4 hours later with an offer to join the incubator program, complete with seed funding and mentorship. The decision to drop out of college in my junior year wasn't easy. Education had been my lifeline, my proof that I could succeed despite everything. But the opportunity was too significant to pass up. If we succeeded, I would achieve financial independence years earlier than planned. If we failed, I could always return to school. The Jenkins were supportive, but cautious when I called to share the news. "Remember that success isn't just about money, buddy," Mr. Jenkins counseled. "It's about building something meaningful, something that helps others." I took his words to heart as Jackson and I developed our business plan. We named our company Shield Tech, with a mission to create security solutions accessible to small businesses and individuals, not just large corporations who could afford enterprise-level protection. The first year was brutal. We worked 18-hour days, slept on office futons, and poured every penny of our seed funding into development and testing. Our first product release had critical flaws that required a complete overhaul. Our second attempt gained modest traction, but not enough to attract the additional investment we needed to scale. Just when we were considering closing shop, a ransomware attack hit several small healthcare providers in the Midwest. One practice had installed our software as part of a beta test and was the only one fully protected. The story caught the attention of a technology reporter who featured Shield Tech in an article about cybersecurity for small businesses. Within weeks, we were flooded with inquiries and new customers. A major healthcare conglomerate approached us about implementing our solution across their network of outpatient facilities. That contract provided the stability and credibility we needed to approach larger investors. By my 25th birthday, Shield Tech had grown from 2 sleep-deprived college dropouts to a company of 50 employees with offices in Chicago and Austin. We had expanded our product line to include solutions for mobile security, cloud protection, and data recovery. I had my own apartment for the first time, a modest one-bedroom, with a view of Lake Michigan and furniture that wasn't salvaged from dumpsters. Success brought a new set of challenges. The more visible I became in the tech community, the more I worried about my past becoming public knowledge. I began seeing a therapist to address the abandonment trauma that still affected my relationships and self-worth. I struggled to trust new people, always waiting for them to discover I wasn't good enough and leave, just as my mother had. Dr. Liston helped me understand that my mother's actions reflected her weaknesses, not mine. "You were a child, buddy," she would remind me in our sessions. "No child deserves to be abandoned, no matter the circumstances. The failing was hers, not yours." After our first major funding round, flush with a sense of vindication, I attempted to contact my mother. I sent a brief email to an address I found through a people search service, simply stating that I was doing well and open to communication if she was interested. The message went unanswered. Whatever closure I had hoped for would have to come from within, not from her acknowledgement. Shield Tech continued to grow beyond my wildest expectations. At 28, I was featured in a Forbes 30 Under 30 list for technology entrepreneurs. At 30, we took the company public, a nerve-wracking process that ended with Jackson and me standing on a platform at the New York Stock Exchange, watching our company's ticker symbol flash across the big board for the first time. The IPO made me a millionaire on paper. The actual financial windfall came 6 months later when our lockup period ended, and I could sell a portion of my shares. I stared at my bank account balance for an hour, unable to comprehend the number of zeros. The scared 16-year-old who had been thrown out with nothing would never have believed this outcome was possible. My first major purchase was a house, not a mansion like Richard's, but a beautiful brownstone in Chicago Lincoln Park neighborhood. It had 3 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen I rarely used, and a home office with enough screens and processing power to run a small NASA operation. Most importantly, it was mine, bought and paid for. No one could ever lock me out again. My second significant financial decision was establishing the Shield Tech Foundation, focused on supporting homeless and at-risk youth, particularly those aging out of foster care or experiencing family rejection. We provided housing assistance, educational scholarships, and tech training programs. Every time I met a teenager in circumstances similar to what I had experienced, I saw myself and was reminded how easily my story could have gone differently without the Jenkins intervention. The Jenkins themselves were the recipients of my third major expenditure. Despite their protests, I paid off their mortgage and established a college fund for their future grandchildren. "It's not charity," I insisted when they tried to refuse. "It's repayment of a debt I can never fully settle." As my public profile grew, so did media interest in my background. I crafted a carefully edited version of my history, emphasizing my entrepreneurial journey while glossing over the family details. In interviews, I credited the Jenkins as mentors who supported my education but avoided discussing my mother or the circumstances that brought me to them. My personal life remained intentionally small and protected. I had a few close friends, mostly fellow entrepreneurs who understood the obsessive drive that kept me working despite having more money than I could spend in a lifetime. I dated occasionally, but retreated whenever relationships became serious enough that sharing my full history seemed necessary. The emptiness I sometimes felt amid all the success was difficult to articulate. I had everything I had ever worked for: professional recognition, financial security, a beautiful home, meaningful work. Yet there remained a hollow space where family should have been, a wound that success could bandage but never fully heal. Then, on an ordinary Sunday morning in April, my doorbell rang. I opened the door without checking the peephole, expecting the grocery delivery I had scheduled. Instead, I found myself face to face with my mother for the first time in 17 years, flanked by 2 teenagers who could only be the twins. For a moment, time seemed to stop as I stared at the woman on my doorstep. Laura had aged considerably since I had last seen her. Her once perfectly highlighted blonde hair was now mostly gray, pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Fine lines etched the corners of her eyes and mouth. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, instead of the designer clothes Richard had insisted upon. But it was unmistakably her, the woman who had chosen to throw away her firstborn son. "Buddy," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "You look good." I remained frozen, one hand still on the doorknob, unable to form words. Beyond the shock of seeing my mother was the additional surprise of the twins Alexander and Amanda standing awkwardly behind her. They were tall and lanky, with my mother's dimpled chin and Richard's straight nose. They looked approximately 17, on the cusp of adulthood just as I had been when I was discarded. "Can we come in?" Laura asked when I failed to respond. "It's been a long time. 17 years, I finally managed, my voice steadier than I felt. 17 years of complete silence. She at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I know. I have a lot to explain. Please, just a few minutes of your time." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside to let them enter. The twins moved like a unit, staying close together as they took in the spacious entryway of my home. Alexander tall and broad-shouldered in a Letterman jacket. Amanda petite with long dark hair wearing a Northwestern University sweatshirt. Both looked deeply uncomfortable, exchanging glances loaded with unspoken communication. I led them to my living room, gesturing toward the sofa while taking a seat in an armchair across from them. Distance seemed crucial, a physical barrier to match the emotional one. "This is a beautiful home," my mother said, looking around at the artwork on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the view of the city through large windows. I saw the article about your company in the Tribune. Am so proud of what you've accomplished." The absurdity of her claiming pride in achievements she had no part in almost made me laugh. "I'm sure you didn't track me down after all this time to compliment my decorating," I said flatly. "Why are you here, Laura?" She flinched at my use of her first name rather than Mom, but continued. "I wanted you to meet your brother and sister. Alexander is captain of his school's debate team. Amanda was just accepted to Northwestern for pre-med. Early decision." The twins shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Neither had spoken a word since arriving. I wondered what they had been told about me over the years, what story my mother had crafted to explain my absence from family photos and holiday gatherings. "Congratulations on Northwestern," I said directly to Amanda, who startled slightly at being addressed. "That's impressive." "Thank you," she murmured, the first words either twin had spoken. "I really want to be a pediatric surgeon." An awkward silence descended. I waited, knowing there had to be more to this unexpected visit than family introductions after nearly 2 decades of silence. Laura cleared her throat. "The thing is, Buddy Richard left us 3 years ago for his personal trainer. She couldn't be much older than the twins." I felt no satisfaction at this news, just a dull acknowledgement that Richard had treated his second family with the same selfishness he had displayed toward me. "He remarried last year," she continued. "His new wife just had a baby. Has not been very reliable with child support. The divorce settlement wasn't what my lawyer promised." And there it was. The real reason for the sudden desire to reconnect. "The twins will both be starting college soon," she said, leaning forward earnestly. "Alexander has some scholarship offers for debate, but with Amanda's medical school plans, we're struggling, Buddy. The house has a second mortgage. I went back to work as an office manager, but it barely covers the bills." I stared at her, wondering if she had any idea how transparent her motivations were. Did she truly believe she could abandon me for 17 years and then walk back into my life with her hand out? "What exactly are you asking?" I said, though I knew the answer. "The twins' tuition, and maybe some help with the mortgage until I can get back on my feet. I know it's a lot to ask, but your family, blood is thicker than water, right?" The irony was so thick I could hardly breathe. Family, blood, words. she had discarded along with me when I was 16 and inconvenient. I noticed Alexander staring at me with an unreadable expression. Amanda was studying her hands in her lap, cheeks flushed with what appeared to be embarrassment. "Is that what you told them?" I asked suddenly. "That we're family? That blood matters?" Laura blinked, confused by my tone. "Of course. You're their brother. Half-brother," I corrected. "And when exactly did you start considering me family again? When you saw my name in the business section? When you realized I could solve your financial problems?" "Buddy," she began. But I cut her off. "What did you tell them?" I demanded, gesturing toward the twins. "About why I'm not in any of the family photos? About why I haven't been at Christmas or birthdays or graduations? Did you tell them you threw me out like garbage when I was their age?" The twins' heads snapped up in unison, identical expressions of shock on their faces. Alexander turned to his mother. "What is he talking about?" Laura paled, hands fluttering nervously. I didn't exactly throw him out. Buddy chose to leave. He wanted independence. He was always so ambitious, so eager to make his own way. The carefully constructed lie unraveled something in me, releasing 17 years of suppressed rage and hurt. I stood up, unable to remain seated with the adrenaline coursing through my system. "That is not what happened," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Richard read my private messages. He convinced you I was a bad influence on the twins. You told me, and I quote, 'The twins need me more than you do. You're old enough to make it on your own.' You gave me $300 and 2 hours to pack. I was 16 years old. I slept in a park the first night because I had nowhere to go." Amanda gasped, one hand covering her mouth. Alexander sat perfectly still, face hardening as he stared at his mother. "It wasn't like that," Laura protested weakly. "Richard said," but her voice trailed off, the familiar pattern of deferring to Richard so ingrained. She continued it even years after he had abandoned her. I decided the twins deserved the full truth. "I was homeless," I continued. "My high school computer science teacher and his wife took me in. They became my family because my biological one threw me away. I worked my way through college. I built my company from nothing. And now you want me to pay for the college education of the children you kept? The ones who were worth keeping?" My voice broke on the last words, the pain still raw despite years of therapy and success. Outside, a neighbor walked by with a dog. A car honked in the distance. Everyday normal sounds that contrasted sharply with the emotional carnage unfolding in my living room. "Mom," Amanda said, her voice small but steady. "Is this true? Did you really make Buddy leave?" Laura began to cry, silent tears tracking down her lined face. "You don't understand. Richard said it was best for everyone. He said Buddy would be fine, that he was causing problems in the house." The therapist said. "What therapist?" I interrupted. "The family therapist. Richard took me to see her. She said sometimes blended families don't work, that sometimes older children from previous relationships can't adjust." "Did this therapist ever actually meet me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Laura shook her head miserably. "No." Richard described the situation to her. He was very convincing. He always was. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The twins exchanged another loaded glance, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Alexander spoke, his voice deeper than I'd expected. "We didn't know," he said simply. "Mom always told us you left to pursue your career, that you were too busy for family stuff." "I found some old photos," Amanda added softly. "In the attic last year. Pictures of you and Mom from before. You looked happy." I asked questions, but she changed the subject. Alexander finished for his sister. She always does when it's something she doesn't want to talk about. I looked at my half-siblings with new eyes, seeing not just Richard's children, the replacements who had been deemed worthy of keeping, but young adults caught in their own version of a fractured family narrative. They had not asked to be born into this situation any more than I had. The confrontation might have continued in this vein. Painful truths and recriminations bouncing off the walls of my carefully constructed life. But what happened next changed everything. Amanda suddenly stood up from the couch, took 3 steps across the room, and did something that shocked everyone present. She hugged me. Not a tentative, stranger-type embrace, but a fierce, full-body hug that spoke of genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I researched you online after finding those photos. I read all the interviews. You never mentioned family except some teacher named Jenkins. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined this." I stood stiffly in her embrace, unprepared for this turn of events. Over Amanda's shoulder, I saw Alexander rise as well, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and determination. "We didn't know," he repeated, moving to stand beside his sister. "We found articles about you months ago. We asked Mom to contact you, but she kept making excuses. Then the Northwestern acceptance came, and suddenly she was in a hurry to reconnect." My mother remained on the couch, shoulders slumped in defeat, as her carefully constructed narrative collapsed around her. The twins had discovered pieces of the truth on their own, filling in the blanks that Laura had tried to erase. Slowly, I returned Amanda's hug, then extended an arm to include Alexander. They were innocent in this family drama. I realized collateral damage in the same way I had been. The difference was that I could choose to break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. "This isn't your fault," I told them, meaning it completely. "None of this is your responsibility." I gently disengaged from the embrace and turned to face my mother. "Laura, I think you should go. I need time to process this." "But what about?" Her eyes darted nervously to the twins, then back to me. "What about the tuition? The mortgage?" I almost laughed at her persistence. Even now, facing the consequences of her past actions, her primary concern remained financial. "I'm not discussing that today. The twins can stay if they want to. You and I need some distance right now." For a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she gathered her purse and stood, looking suddenly older and smaller. "I'll wait in the car," she murmured to the twins, then headed for the door without another word. When the front door closed behind her, a palpable release of tension filled the room. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to my own habit that it startled me. "She's been desperate since Dad left," he said, not exactly apologizing for her but offering context. "He married Kimberly and basically started over. New wife, new baby, new life. Mom keeps trying to pretend everything is fine, but the house is being foreclosed on next month." "I don't care about the money," Amanda added quickly. "That's not why we're here. I mean, that's why Mom brought us, but we wanted to meet you anyway, to know our brother." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. I gestured for them to sit again, this time taking a seat on the couch with them, rather than maintaining distance in the armchair. For the next 2 hours we talked, really talked. They told me about growing up with Richard, who had been just as controlling and critical with them as he had been with me. They shared stories about school, friends, their hopes for the future. I told them about building Shield Tech, about the Jenkins family who had saved me, about my foundation work with homeless youth. When they finally left to rejoin our waiting mother, we had exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet again without Laura present. I stood on my porch watching them walk to the car, feeling a surprising lightness in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of something new and unexpected. True to my word, I took time to process before making any decisions about financial support. I consulted Dr. Liston, who cautioned me against allowing guilt or manipulation to drive my choices. I spoke with Mr. Jenkins, who has always offered wisdom without judgment. 3 weeks after the surprise visit, I invited the twins to dinner at my home. Without their mother present, they were more relaxed, more themselves. Alexander told terrible jokes that made Amanda roll her eyes. She described her volunteer work at a children's hospital with passionate detail. They bickered good-naturedly over the last dinner roll, in a way that spoke of a close sibling bond. By dessert, I had made my decision. I would establish educational trusts for both of them with specific conditions. They would need to maintain certain grade point averages and work part-time during school years. The money would go directly to their institutions, not to Laura. Most importantly, I would serve as a mentor, not just a checkbook helping them navigate college and early career choices, as the Jenkins had done for me. My relationship with Laura developed more slowly, with clear boundaries established from the beginning. I refused to discuss financial matters with her directly, making it clear that my support of the twins was for them, not for her. I suggested resources for financial counseling and job placement services, but maintained emotional distance. The twins began volunteering at my foundation during school breaks, working with young people who had experienced family rejection and homelessness. Watching Amanda comfort a 17-year-old girl whose parents had kicked her out, or Alexander teaching coding basics to a group of shelter residents, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They were helping to heal others, while healing our fractured family connection. 6 months after our initial reunion, Laura asked to meet with me alone. We sat at a quiet corner table in a cafe, two adults with shared history but limited understanding of each other's present lives. She looked better than she had at our first encounter, more rested, more present. "I'm in therapy," she announced without preamble. "Real therapy, not whatever Richard arranged. I'm trying to understand why I made the choices I did, why I let him control me so completely." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to dismiss her efforts as too little, too late. Another part recognized the courage it took to face her failures. "I know I can't undo what I did," she continued. "I know sorry isn't enough. But I am sorry, buddy. More than I can express. I failed you completely as a mother." It was the first genuine, unqualified apology she had offered. No excuses about Richard or family therapists or difficult circumstances. Just acknowledgement of her responsibility. "I can't go back to being your son the way I was before," I said carefully. "Too much has happened. But maybe we can build something new, something honest." She nodded, tears welling but not falling. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Our reconciliation remains a work in progress. There are good days when we can share a meal and conversation without the past intruding too heavily. There are difficult days when a casual comment triggers old pain and resentment, but there is movement forward, however halting. The greatest healing, surprisingly, has come through my relationship with the twins. They graduate high school next month, with plans to attend college in the fall. Amanda at Northwestern, Alexander at University of Chicago, on a debate scholarship. They spend nearly every weekend at my house, filling the space with the noise and energy of late adolescence. They bring friends over to swim in the pool and raid my refrigerator. They ask for advice about classes and relationships and future careers. They have become the family I never expected to have, a bridge between past and future. The Jenkins remain my emotional anchors, the people who taught me that family is defined by actions, not blood. When Mrs. Jenkins was diagnosed with breast cancer last year, I arranged for the best oncologists and treatment options. When their first grandchild was born, I was at the hospital with flowers and a ridiculously large teddy bear. They are, and always will be, my chosen family. Through my foundation, I meet young people facing circumstances similar to what I experienced. I tell them my story not as a rags to riches fairy tale, but as proof that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. That one person's rejection doesn't define your worth. That family can be found in unexpected places. I still have the coffee can where I saved for college as a child. It sits on my office shelf as a reminder of the scared, determined 16-year-old who refused to give up even when the people who should have protected him chose not to. Some days I look at it and marvel at how far I have come. Other days I look at it and remember how easily my story could have gone differently without the kindness of strangers who became more than family. What would you do if someone who abandoned you suddenly reappeared wanting something? Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship after profound betrayal? Is forgiveness possible without forgetting the harm done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, Please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, family isn't always defined by blood, but by who stands beside you when you need them most. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength on your own journey of healing and growth.